Okay, wonderful. I'm in the show. That was on the tool sets. So, welcome to the session of mice, men, and machines. This webinar focuses on how scientific discovery is based on the novelty of questions you ask. We will discover the art of asking diverse questions by starting with a short warming up reflection on science, followed by two practical examples from neuroscience and from machine learning, and a summary of the underlying process that can be applied to any scientific topic at hand. My name is Karen Grasenik, and my background is in biomedical engineering, and I'm coordinating the HPP measures related to diversity in research, and thereby referring to the research content, as well as research collaborations and equal opportunities. Let's start with a warming up reflection on science as promised. Science, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, is the careful study of the structure and behavior of the physical world, especially by watching, measuring, and doing experiments. And science is the development of theories to describe the results of these activities. Let's take a scientific view on the forest in front of us. What is it that we want to study carefully, to structure and measure? We might think about the relevance of the forest for the Earth's atmosphere by the production of oxygen. We will need to specify our interest further. Are we interested in the overall forest, or are we interested in specific plants, the trees, for example? Will we focus on the trees or on the leaves of the trees? Or maybe we are even interested in the interaction of different plants within this forest. But which particular forest are we talking about? Which images of forest do you have in mind right now? Does it look like a tropical rainforest, for example? Like this one, maybe? Or does it more look like a forest in an alpine region, like we can see in this picture? And although at an abstract level, the forests, the one from the tropical rainforest and the one forest that grows in the alpine region, on an abstract level, those forests can be described in similar terms. But we certainly agree that the detailed investigation of these forests will reveal significant differences between the tropical and the alpine forest. It might be more beneficial to differentiate these forests rather than talking about an average forest or the forest as an abstract concept. The same is true for neuroscience. In neuroscience, we talk about the nervous system, the rodent brain, the human brain, or specific brain regions, and so forth. The aggregate level of the models we choose, what details we consider or leave out, has of course severe consequences on the insights we can gain from our research and what might stay hidden. To understand the consequences, we will start with an example of a neurodegenerative disease that we all know, even if you're not involved in the specific field of science. And this neurodegenerative disease we are talking about has been known since ancient times. In his article in 2011, Christopher Butts pointed out that early descriptions of the disease go back as far as 1000 before Christ. For example, in ancient India, a disease was named Kampavata after the Sanskrit word kampa for tremor. And Chinese medical handbooks described persons that are shaking, bending over, having difficulties to flex their knees and to walk. In Europe, the disease has been named after the English physician James Parkinson. In 2007 and in 1817, he published an essay on the shaken palsy. This assay established the shaking palsy as a recognized medical condition. 6 decades later, Jean Chacon was the first to recognize the importance of Parkinson's work and named the disease after him. He described the progress of the disease, the physical changes in the patients over time. Again, a decade later, William Goers published his Manual of Diseases of the Nervous Systems. He detailed the description further based on a larger sample of patients. He also offered illustrative drawings. And when we look at his drawing, it fits quite well to the image we might have in mind of a patient with Parkinson's disease today. A person older than 65 or more, and often a man, and more often a man than a woman. And it was already Goers who correctly stated that men suffer approximately twice as often from Parkinson's disease than women. As scientist, you will of course ask yourself immediately, why is this the case? Why twice as many men than women? What can we learn from the disease, its causes, its progression, and its treatment by differentiating women and men in our studies? Well, we first must be able to identify who suffers from Parkinson's disease, and typical, well-known symptoms of Parkinson's disease are tremor, stiff muscles, slow movements, and with the progress of the disease, new symptoms occur like the postural instability, freezing, that is the inability to continue to walk, and cognitive impairments, and many other symptoms. Are there any specific differences that can be observed between women and men concerning these symptoms? Yes, indeed. Parkinson's disease affects women and men differently. It has been shown that at early stages, women are more often affected by tremor and severe pain syndromes. Men, on the other hand, show more often motoric symptoms like slow movements, muscle stiffness. With the progression of the disease, male patients show more serious postural problems and tend to suffer more from a decrease of their cognitive abilities. On the other hand, fatigue, depression, loss of taste and smell are again more common and severe in women. Again, as scientists, we must ask ourselves, why is this the case? Only observing the symptoms will certainly not be enough if we want to understand the causes of the differences of Parkinson's disease for women and men. Moreover, for the time being, we differentiated women and men binary, maybe based on their names or the data sheets we had at hand. So, if we really want to understand what's going on, we must investigate sex differences in further detail. But how do we define sex? What do we mean when referring to sex differences? Biological factors to be considered are most commonly hormones, chromosomes, anatomy or body composition. And if we study carefully the complex interplay of these factors, we will reveal that the idea of a binary definition of sexes is far too simplistic. Unfortunately, we will not have the time to investigate this complex interplay further in our webinar. For our case study, we simply decide to focus on one sex-related hormone, estrogen. And when studying the literature, we will discover that the hormone estrogen has been shown to reduce the risks of developing Parkinson's disease. Estrogen plays an important role in inflammatory processes. We will expand our research and, again, for simplicity, we study just the impact of the average body mass index, which differs between women and men. And indeed, we will find evidence that body mass index is linked to the development of Parkinson's disease. However, only for men. But can we really reduce our research on biological factors only? Isn't the development of a disease also related to environmental factors, being exposed to certain chemicals, for example? And what about gender, the different roles that women and men have in society, as experts, for example, or caregivers? Do they contribute to the disease? Maybe also because they might have different attitudes towards healthcare and exercise. Maybe they are exposed to different kinds of stress depending on the society they live in. And given all the details and thoughts we had so far, should the medical treatment of women and men who suffer from Parkinson's disease be the same? Well, certainly not, you might think. And not surprisingly, studies reveal differences in the reaction of Parkinson's disease treatments. Further details, if you are interested in, are given in the meta study published 2019 by Cerri and Blandini in the Journal of Parkinson's Disease, which I have been referring to for this case study. With their publication, Cerri and Blandini wanted to draw attention to sex-related differences in Parkinson's disease. They write that specific needs of women with Parkinson's disease are still partially overlooked, and the differences between women and men strongly suggest the need for personalized sex-related therapies in Parkinson's disease. Moreover, sex hormones act throughout the entire brain of both males and females, and sex differences are now highlighted in brain regions and functions not previously considered as subjected to such differences, opening the way to better understanding of sex-related behaviors and functions. Cerri and Blandini hope to encourage the scientific community and policymakers to foster the development of tailored interventions and the design of innovative programs. Remember, at the beginning of our example, we realized that Parkinson's disease has been known already since 1000 before Christ. We discovered that at least since 200 years we know that Parkinson's disease affects women and men differently. In 2019, no more than a year ago, scientific communities and policymakers are encouraged to tailor their interventions to develop personalized, at least sex-differentiating therapies and care practices for patients suffering from Parkinson's disease. Maybe you think this is a very specific example. Is this also true for other fields of sciences? Can we find examples in other fields of sciences? I've promised to do so. And I've chosen a field inspired by neuroscience, that is machine learning. Machines commonly learn based on artificial neural networks. Trained on digital data, machines are, or let's say the underlying algorithms, can, for example, learn to identify trees within a set of plants and, if feasible, to provide us with additional information on the specific tree at hand. However, machine learning lacks the ability to find and understand additional features in the data presented, to reason or to justify decisions made. Although inspired by biology, artificial neural networks differ substantially from our brain. Machine learning has been applied in medicine to diagnose diseases based on large digital data sets. Let's take an example of an algorithm categorizing different skin conditions. There are already apps available for your cell phone. Maybe you're aware of them, or maybe you even made use of them before. You hold the cell phone to your skin, send a picture to the application, and you will get a reliable response on the conditions of your skin. If you have a light skin color, because such applications have been criticized for failing to recognize cancer on darker skin accurately. These findings have led to a critical discourse revealing unquestioned norms as well as oversimplified models and failures to carefully examine the data sets used to train the algorithm. Scientists unfortunately often fail to diversify the data because of costs. Maybe you only have a database with light skinned people at hand, or sometimes because they just didn't think about it. However, it has also been shown that companies have not paid enough attention on the different appearances of humans throughout the world. The accuracy and failure rate of such commercially used algorithms has most recently been brought to public attention again. Facial recognition systems are accused of racist biases. They are used to mass surveillance, racial profiling, while failing to recognize darker faces correctly, which might lead to mistaken identifications of persons. Such facial recognition systems have been used by police and authorities worldwide, raising, of course, data protection concerns. And it was Joy Blandini and her colleague Timnit Gebru, you might remember, who in 2018 revealed for the first time the extent to which commercial facial recognition systems were biased. Because most training materials have not been sufficiently diverse, women with dark skin color are recognized worst. You can see the results for the study on the screen right now. Companies, therefore, have expanded the datasets, trying to include all skin colors, age groups, and genders. However, these datasets have often been obtained from social media sources like Facebook or Flickr, raising again concerns of data protection. As responsible scientists, we must reflect that biases have been built in the production and usage of data and that they impact the applications based on them. Underlying datasets should therefore be examined carefully, as well as the degree of generalized conclusions we might wish to draw from them. Let's summarize our conclusions by starting with two guiding questions. What is the focus of your research? And who are the beneficiaries of your research? By now, it should be evident that whenever tissues, cells, animals, or human beings are the focus of your research, you certainly should at least consider sex differences, but also additional factors like age, ethnicity, or the gender of your research objects. As responsible scientists, you should in any case reflect the beneficiaries of your science. That might be other scientists, end users, or even the broader public, which might be affected in different ways by the results of your findings. Based on the two guiding questions, what is the focus of your research? Who will benefit? We can come up with a framework for your research process. Every research process starts, of course, with the literature review. And when keeping diversity in mind, you will hopefully carefully study the literature at hand and ask yourself to which extent have variables that are related to diversity been considered in the literature. Can you find any correlations and intersections of variables addressed in the literature? And if you examine the concept and models, are they suitable for integrating new diversity aspects? When setting up your research design, consider, for example, how differently variables might be operationalized, leading to potentially different interpretations of your findings, as we examined by differentiating sex in different ways, for example. Examine your results carefully for possible spurious correlations, like the body mass index. On the bottom line of this framework for your research process, you can see the question, does the diversity of the research team match their requirements? why does the team come into this presentation? Why does team diversity matter? I've prepared a rather simple example for you. Have a look at the fruits in front of you. How would you sort these fruits? Well, most obviously, they all have a different color and shape and weight. Maybe we can also think about the regions that grow, or what's the right time to harvest, the season, when to harvest these fruits. So these might be some of the options you might come up with. And maybe some of you, when looking at a picture, get a little bit confused by having a tomato in it. Is tomato a fruit? Is it really a fruit? Well, it was Randall Monroe who put the tomato in there, and he came up with this little cartoon because his hate of grapefruit. So he decided to sort fruits in terms of taste, untasty, difficult, or easy to eat and to peel, of course. And you can see the grapefruit in this difficult and untasty corner. Well, for me, it's a rather specific way of sorting fruits that I never came across before. And like with sorting fruits, there might be quite different ways of using categories, variables, and models for your science you might not have been aware. If you stick with the same field of science, with people who are very similar with you, you will not come up with completely new designs and questions at hand. So reach out for diversity in your teams. You can find out more by reading the neuroethic blog post I wrote, or by having visiting the Human Brain Project website. And on the gender equality measures and materials, you will find more examples from different fields of science and some guidelines we prepared for you, which are related to the research process and further topics like publications and, of course, being a responsible leader of your scientific team. I've also added the literature for you that this presentation is based on. And thank you very much for joining this webinar, and I'm ready to hear your questions. Thank you very much for being here with me. Oh, here comes the first question. I think I put the screen here so I can read it more easily. You mentioned biased machine learning as one of the examples that show that diversity in research is crucial. Which measures can be taken to minimize these biases? Well, that's a good question, and there are a whole lot of issues around that, and it's true, we only addressed a few aspects. We had a look at the data, and that is used for machine learning, and we could say that one guiding principle, of course, and that's also established in the Human Brain Project, is at least the data should be fair. So as covered in this presentation, please have a look to the diversity aspects, to the balance of different aspects that can be relevant for your machine to learn, how they are covered in the data sets ahead, and make sure that the data can be classified in this way. But if you think, for example, of self-driving cars and all the issues that have been discussed, it's also a question on norms and values that we stand for in our society, and that could be integrated in the algorithms of machines. So this is a specific area of science that we did not cover in this presentation. Thank you for the question. You mentioned the search for intersectionality of variables. What does that mean? Okay, in this framework for our research that I showed, I said, please have a look for intersectionality. And we had one short example in this presentation that was for the facial recognition software. If you think about searching within the software for men and women at the one hand, and at the other hand, searching for skin color. So that would be two variables that you can find in your database, but only by combining them, for example, to light colored men and light colored women, darker skinned men, darker skinned women, then you will come up with new findings. So you can see that gender and skin color in this example intersect with each other, and it's important to look out, so not only look at variables in separate ways, but to combine them and see how they interact with each other. Thank you for the question. You included cells as relevant for diversity in research. Can you give an example how this relates to sex differences, which you emphasized? Okay, yeah. We talked a lot about sex, and indeed, if you think about cells, especially stem cells, it has been proven that the sex of the stem cells is relevant. And interesting enough, independently of hormones. So recent studies, for example, by Bridget Daisy, I think also a year ago, have proven that if you use stem cells from females, if you use male stem cells for that purpose, and again, the inflammatory processes that we talked about play an important role. And interesting enough, you can put these female stem cells into male mice, for example, and into female mice, and the effect is independent of the sex of the mice and mouse, and independent of the hormones. So it reveals that these sex differences we talked about are indeed relevant down to the level of stem cells. Thank you for the question. Okay, so thank you for the questions at hand. This is the end of the session, and I wish you a wonderful lunch break. If this is the time for lunch in the country you are watching right now, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.